Good morning, America. Evening, Asia. Hello, world. Welcome to the program. Hurrah, it is Friday, but a very busy day. It's the great wreck of the Chinese tech, and it could open up a whole new front in the trade war with the United States. Now, here are some of the details, because shares in a string of Chinese and Asian tech firms, including Lenovo, ZTE, and Wistron, they've tumbled after Bloomberg reported that China is using tiny computer chips embedded on circuit boards to spy on US companies and government agencies. Bloomberg says the chips were no bigger than a grain of rice, and that the super micro products they ended up in were used by the likes of Amazon and Apple, the CIA, and the US Defense Department. Now, Amazon and Apple are two of the world's most valuable companies. We know that. We talk about them a lot. And such a breach of security could be hugely damaging. Both said there was no evidence to support these claims. Lenovo responded by saying Supermicro wasn't one of its suppliers, and the Chinese ministry called it a gratuitous accusation there. Let's get rid of the cube. Okay, as promised, we're waiting in the wings. Miranda Carr, China macro strategist at the Hong Kong-based investment firm Haitong International, and Stephanie Hare, a independent tech expert. Ladies, good to see you. Let's start with you, Miranda. Do you think this is only one source we're hearing? They worked on it for a year, Bloomberg, the report. Credible?
Yeah, it could. I mean, obviously, Bloomberg completely stand by the story. Apple and Amazon have denied it. So you've got two quite credible sources on both sides. But the issue, I mean, just in terms of the Chinese perspective, there's a few holes that open up. One is that the technology, you'd be pushing Chinese semiconductor technology to its limits to get a computer chip that small that could do so much processing in the way that's described. So it's using 7 nanometer technology. Which would be way beyond what's actually possible in China at the moment. So that sort of debates how did they actually manage to do it. And then the other bit of the story, which I think is quite, if the People's Liberation Army is going in and bribing subcontractors in order to put these little chips on, they then have to know the Supermicro supply chain sufficiently well enough to know that that's going to end up in the CIA computers. Which is possibly giving a wee bit too much credence to the People's Liberation Army knowledge of Supermicro's supply chain. So I'd just raise those as two sort of question marks I'd have on the story.
Okay. Can we pull out here, because Steph? So this is one of the boards, and what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a tiny little piece on this board, the size of the tip of a sharpened pencil, right? You think this is a very credible story, don't you?
I do. So we need the chip really to be able to only do a very limited thing, which is to be able to accept code coming from elsewhere on the internet. So it doesn't actually have to have massively sophisticated processing power. It just needs to be able to alter and do a few of those processing bits. Yes, it has to be extremely thin, so I agree. We would want to see this tested forensically by a FireEye, a Mendiet, some sort of third objective provider, not necessarily just the US government, right? Who's doing this investigation and has been for 3 years, and that investigation is ongoing. We would want to see this tested objectively. For the first part. But second, it isn't just this question of this chip, which of course cannot be checked on every single server in the world. Almost. That's not sustainable. There's also some patching vulnerabilities that we've picked up in the Bloomberg report, and also network cards which had outdated firmware. Okay, so that contained known security vulnerabilities, and a fourth component that we haven't even gotten to yet.
So they've got backups, if you will, right?
Well, absolutely, and anyone who's going to be infiltrating a system is most likely not going to just use one attack vector. So we've identified 3 there, but the fourth could be a human component. There could be people placed within different companies as well. So we just don't know yet. This is very early days for this investigation to have been announced.
Miranda, do you think it's strange that we haven't, that both Amazon, because Amazon and Apple aren't being blamed here. I mean, they didn't do anything with the chips. They just simply the end user of them, that they've come out and denied something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, they've denied it in quite categoric
they've been quite strong.
So, and either you saying they're lying in a way which they could then get into trouble for if there was any court cases came out as a result of that. It wasn't a sort of, oh, we have no knowledge of it. It was denying specific elements to the allegations. So they're quite strong against it. But then again, of course, Bloomberg's quite strong for it. So I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of question marks, and in some ways, it really depends on who you want to believe. Yeah,
and Steph, what do you think about the fact that they have not? Well, we haven't heard from anybody apart from Bloomberg. Where's Europe in this? Where is, I don't know, the US government, FBI?
So the silence here in Europe is really telling, right? So we've just had the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation,
Tough
come
new
into effect.
EU data laws.
Exactly. In the Bloomberg report, it says no consumer data is thought to have been taken. But the question that I have for European regulators and for the Information Commissioner's Office here in the UK is, it doesn't really matter if we know the data has been taken or not. You have to notify of a breach within 72 hours if you think that was even possible. This investigation's been ongoing since 2015 and it's still happening. So we're now in very murky waters here on this side of the Atlantic. What response can we see from Europe?
This could make Made in China brand, this could make it a bit toxic. And then you say, what happens to the global supply chain then?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big things. I mean, obviously, one of the things about this story is we're right in the middle of a trade war. You had Pence coming out saying that China is exposing a risk on the election side and infiltrating into sort of the Chinese, into the US sort of midterms. Then you've got this thing of you can't trust anything which is made in China. You know, even if you're a US manufacturer manufacturing in China, you still have vulnerabilities. So it raises questions not only for the Chinese suppliers, but also the whole Chinese supply chain.
Ladies, I wish I had another 10, 15 minutes, but I don't. Miranda, Carr and Stephanie Hare, much appreciated. Thanks so much for coming on in. That story ain't going away. We'll keep covering that.